set? Ready to go? When they're We call this meeting to order, please, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And could you please let the record show that all 7 commissioners are present? Is there any correspondence?
Yes, there is, Mayor. There was a letter from the ACLU to Rehoboth Beach, City of Rehoboth Beach, entitled Problems with Chapter 230 Permit Scheme. That was sent to us on February 12th, and it is dated February 12th as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll move right into public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to speak shall do so at the microphone, stating their name and address. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, and the commissioners do not respond to public comments.
Good morning, Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. It's a request to the mayor for consideration that on item number 4, correspondence related to agenda items. What would be the harm of moving those items, those pieces of correspondence, to the agenda items so that they're not separated from the letter that's written early to the point of the discussion in the meeting? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Gary Glass, 105 Country Club Drive. I cannot tell you how much I endorse what Lisa and Paul said about open government and including the public in the discussion. Things are not made available to the public. Correspondence, which you just referred to, as far as I know, is not on the agenda packet and not available to the public. At commissioner meetings, correspondence is not put on there. I understand that a notice went out of some kind that attached a contract of some kind with regards to parking garages or something. Those kinds of things would be good for the public to see if you all are looking at contracts and things. This was a very good discussion by Stan Mills this morning about the personnel. He pointed out a lot of changes. If you allow the public to review, and I can assure you I know many people in the public that will review, we can give you good comments back and we can help you to create a good document so we don't have to keep revising it and redoing it. We can get it right the first time. Reports aren't made available, studies aren't made available, sometimes minutes aren't made available. I think we've gone through this with a FOIA request already. I hope it's clear. The public has a right to know that this is our city too. And this is not what's happening. Some people think that they can run the government behind the scenes without the public involvement, and that's wrong, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop pretty soon. I think it also needs to be easy to locate these documents online. Once you post them online, sometimes it's convoluted how you get there through documents on the web portal and the document center and things like that. They need to be, it's easy when it's in the attachment, as an attachment to the agenda packet, and you can see it all right there. It needs to be easy for the public to find. I think it's important that you allow people to participate in the discussions, and I think the place for the discussions to take place is the committee system. The Streets Committee won't let you participate. I was in a meeting recently, and the person in charge of the meeting allowed us to participate. I believe that everybody that got up and walked out of that committee meeting felt like it was a productive day. When you go to the Streets Committee meetings, she only lets you speak at the end after they've made all their decisions, so she can check the box and say the public got to participate. We had no participation. Everything was decided, and we walked out the door, and they said, "Thank you very much for your comments." And I'm sure it went right through the air, and nobody took any notice of it. Checking the box is not right. I do agree that the city government should be run by the city manager, not by the mayor. The mayor is an elected official. You can give policy guidance, and you can give review of personnel actions. But this is not, you didn't buy the city when you got elected mayor, Paul. This is the city that is supposed to be run by the city manager, and I think that structure is good, and I think it's worked well. I believe that Glenn needs to understand that his responsibility is to represent the city residents and property owners. It's not a personal attorney for members of the council and the commission here, and nor is it a personal attorney for the mayor. He should advise you to keep you out of legal jeopardy so that we, the taxpayers, don't have to pay enormous legal bills because we're getting bad advice and you're taking and making bad action. He should help to educate every member up here on what is right and what is wrong. We found this out in the FOIA request, and it's not right. Thank you.
Mayor, respectfully, I'd like to make 2 comments. One is, with respect to live stream, I think it's one of the greatest things that we've ever done. However, I think it has, we have an obligation that if we have documents that we're talking about, that they are online a sufficient time ahead of time, especially for the meeting, so that those watching live or watching recording can have them in front of them. So that I would like to see us work on. The second thing is this public comment. As you know, the format's been changed by the mayor when he got here several times. I would like a commissioner conversation about public comment and the opportunities for the public to talk at workshop meetings, whereas they're not allowed now under certain conditions. And I'd like to suggest that that would be on our April workshop, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't believe I'm going to say this twice in one meeting, but I fully agree with Commissioner Mills. And especially, I would like to discuss the public comment, you know, and making it more inclusive. I think the more public comment we have, the better our legislation is and our policies. Totally agree with that comment, so thank you.
I would like to add, I think we have another bad habit, unless I'm mishearing it. Sometimes during the correspondence part, we talk about, we'll read it into the record when we get to the agenda item, and then we get to the agenda item, and sometimes we miss that step. So we probably, at a very minimum, while we're talking about this, need to remember that if we're going to do that, we need to do it during the agenda item.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is John Mears. I am not a resident of Rehoboth Beach, but I do live in the area, and I am a member of the American Civil Liberties Union, but I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I am speaking to the agenda item regarding the expressive activity permit ordinance. And I've read the ordinance. I'm quite concerned in that it, on its face, is an abridgment of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. The right to peaceably assemble is to be never abridged without due cause. 8 weeks prior notice is an extreme abridgment. Many times there are issues that come up. People wish to gather, the places to gather are ordinarily in cities. I've marched in Boston, I've marched in Washington, D.C., I've marched in Columbia, South Carolina, and other places, and I'm familiar with many marches. And they are effective. They are expression of the will of people and the expression of the right to peaceably assemble. If I am out of order, I will speak again. I reserve the right to speak again when that issue is brought up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Hughes, are you referring to the special events?
Yes.
Because on the agenda today is something sponsored by Commissioner Calusi that we'll be talking about, and that is something called expressive activity permit ordinance. So
That is what I'm speaking to.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
My first time here. I'm Kathleen Baker. I live at 35496 Copper Drive South in Sterling Crossing, just outside the city limits. I'm a member of a number of organizations, including our beloved Rehoboth Beach Historic Society, as the mayor knows. And I'm very grateful to be here in this beautiful town, in this beautiful area. With regard to the expressive speech, what are we afraid of? What is the real reason for this concern. If revenue enhancement is the purpose, well, let's all get together and talk about revenue enhancement. I walked on the boardwalk a couple of years ago with about 50 other people for about 15 minutes. Boy, it was great. We didn't misbehave. And guess what? There were probably about 2,000 other people walking on the boardwalk. They just weren't walking together. So if that's the difference, okay, we can talk about that. But I would say this. The right peaceably to assemble is one of the rights that many people in this country have fought to maintain or to establish for those who have had no right to do so for a long, long time. And it evolved in 1960s with that Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. I would simply urge you to respect those efforts and acknowledge that people come out of love and care. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Martha Redmond, and I am the president of the Sussex County League of Women Voters. I live in Melville, Delaware. This is in pertaining to the expressive activity permit ordinance. I foresee two requirements which would create an undue burden for freedom of speech. One is the 8-week notice, which would obliterate any time-sensitive issues, as well as the cost. I would like to propose that nonprofit groups, 501c3 groups, could register with the city, and we could get a waiver from either the cost or the time requirement. As a 501c3 group, we get waivers all the time in using different facilities, because essentially what this does is it prices us out of our free speech rights. So we would like to have, if you're going to continue with this, to have either a decrease or a waiver in the fees and the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just ask for some clarification, particularly from the last two speakers and maybe those that are coming. Are you referring specifically to the previously passed special events ordinance or the proposed expressive activities ordinance?
We asked that Joanne answer that question.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Could Commissioner Paluzzi clarify?
Yeah, I don't believe anyone's seen a copy of the expressive activity ordinance, as that's a draft that I put together. I've asked Ann to make some copies to be distributed. So when we do talk about that agenda item here later in our meeting today, you'll have that in your hands, and it will be helpful, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Joanne Cabry. I live outside of Rehoboth, and I hadn't planned on speaking today, but there is some confusion. We haven't seen the draft, so we can't make a public comment about it, and yet we're not allowed to make a comment, or we cannot participate when it is discussed. So we talked about it when we were out in the hall waiting, and we were, if we can have a chance to address it as you're discussing it, that would be one thing, but we know we cannot, so that's why we're trying to make a few comments at the beginning. And since I'm up here, I want to thank Commissioner Schlosser for giving a couple of us a chance to ask questions at the Friday workshop of the special events, and I appreciate Chief Banks answering a couple of my questions. For those of you who weren't there, and since I won't be able to speak again, I still left that meeting, it felt better that I at least could ask questions to get some clarification. But I still don't understand, and maybe it'll become clearer when we see what's in your draft, how these two ordinances can coexist. Because Chief Banks reaffirmed that the words demonstration and rally are in Chapter 230. If the paper is correct, Commissioner Paluzzi's ordinance will not replace, it will coexist, it will not change Chapter 230. So if it's not going to change, the words demonstration and rally are still in there. Another thing I had a question about, Chapter 230, as the ACLU letter points out, has no exemptions, no waivers. There is a $600 non-refundable fee. Nowhere in that ordinance does it give Chief Banks, as well-intentioned as he is, to charge to say, okay, it didn't cost $600 because you didn't use the bandstand. I appreciate that he's willing, to refund part of that fee, but the ordinance doesn't give him that authority. And if we consider this country is based on the rule of law, you are the elected officials of this city, you draft the laws, the agencies, the police department, they enforce the laws that you pass. They can't interpret the laws. They can't say, oh, well, yeah, it says 600 non-refundable, but we're going to refund 400 to this group. As I said, as well-intentioned as Chief Banks may be, he does not have that authority. So again, there were, the other thing he mentioned was that he is not going to see demonstrations, and I'm paraphrasing you, and maybe I shouldn't, but he used the example of if 2 or 3 people want to stand in front of the Verizon building with placards, that's not really a special event. Well, I specifically said, well, what if 200 people want to stand? And he did say, well, that's different. So there's a lot of confusion, how Chapter 230 is going to be enforced. I've heard a number of you refer to it as a work in progress. That concerns me. Once a bill is passed, and especially passed unanimously, it is no longer a work in progress. It's the law of the land. It's the law of the city. So, I've heard almost each one of you refer to it as a work in progress. No, you passed it. It's on the books. So that was the other point. And one other point, and this is my 3rd meeting, I've heard Chief Banks, and I'm sorry for keep using your name, but that's talk about, how closely Lieutenant Riddle is going to work with the communications director who'll make the decisions. I have yet to hear anybody mention the city manager. Chapter 230 gives sole authority to approve or deny a permit to the city manager. So why there's references to the communications director, to Lieutenant Riddle, to all these other people about decision-making, Chapter 230 only has one person listed, and that's your city manager. So there were some observations. I would love to be able, other people, to talk about this. I think it would save time. 6 of us spoke at the January meeting. We got together, we organized so we weren't repetitive. None of us spoke for more than 2 minutes. And then some of us sat here, and there was a half-hour discussion with Chief Banks and Lieutenant Riddle and all of you, and we had to sit here. I had these same questions then. Why has nobody mentioned the city manager? I couldn't raise my hand and ask that question. I read in the paper the next week that the mayor said it will not be changed. So why did we speak if no one listened to our comments and if we were not allowed to participate in the discussion when I could have said, how come the city manager's not being there? So I rambled a little bit here today. I apologize for that, but it would help us, everybody says, if we could ask questions during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. While you were talking, Ann Womack handed out a copy of the support document relative to expressed activity that's on the agenda. What my hope is that y'all stay and listen. We haven't even talked about it. This is our introduction to this special activity thing. So what I'm hoping is that we all listen, and then immediately afterwards bombard us with your comments or something. Let us know, because we need to hear from you. But again, we have not even had our first introduction yet. So stay tuned. Thank you.
I spoke last time too. My name's William Zach. I live outside of town, near Rehoboth though. I wasn't going to speak, but it seems to me you have 2 problems. One's immediate, which is this business about the former proposal and the new expressive document. But underlying all of it is the issue you mentioned before about public involvement in these kinds of hearings. You have a huge problem there. I mean, I read in the paper about the rebuke from the Attorney General. There is all kinds of difficulty about what citizens find out about what's going on, how they can find out, how they can participate. As you presently have the rules, you folks can have this discussion today, but citizens can't respond to it institutionally, according to the way you're running committee meetings, which is completely cart before the horse. We're allowed to make comments before a meeting when we don't know what the discussion specifically is going to be about. But once we find out what the proposal is specifically about, there's nothing in the way the commissioners are organizing the citizens' involvement for us to participate in it. And as the gentleman mentioned before, you know, about the situation he was in, the decision was made, comments were allowed afterwards, but it's just to check a box that, yes, they participated, but it didn't make any difference in the dynamics of actually being a communal enterprise that is involved in trying to make the best decisions as readily and quickly as possible by communicating with one another. It seems as if the way you've set things up actually rules against participating with one another.
Well, let me say that this is the exact reason why I brought up I wanted to.
And I applaud you for doing so.
This is the foundation for that discussion at the next workshop meeting. Thank you very much.
Mayor, may I say something? I was a commissioner several years ago from 2007 to 2013. At that time, there was never any allowance for people to necessarily comment at workshops.
Point of order. I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we say that conversation for the April workshop meeting?
Yeah, but the only thing I'm
going to disagree with you.
Okay, well, just 1 second. Oh, 1 second, though. So I think initially what my understanding of how our workshops should move forward is it was an opportunity for first the commissioners to, when something new is brought up, for us to discuss it, and then the regular meetings were for the public to come in and have the opportunity to speak directly to what we had been talking about. Now, I understand it's a frustration for people to come here to the workshop and we're going to discuss something and they want to be involved, but they can't be the way things are organized at the present time. Maybe that should change, I don't know. But you do have to understand that the commissioners need some opportunity to talk among themselves about what they believe in, agree with, and so forth, and then have the public react. I think that's really what we're trying to do.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I would agree. And if I can go back to the reasoning behind it, I think Commissioner Coluzzi accentuated it, is our workshops are the commissioners.
I'm sorry, point of order. This is,
please.
I'm asking you, point of order. My question is this on the agenda and appropriate to be discussing today when I have asked for it to specifically be put on the April workshop agenda to notice everybody about it so that we then appropriately talk about it? That is the question on the table.
And I would suggest, yes, we will discuss it at that point in time. I'm just trying to make a point of how it got started. Basically, the commissioners' workshops are the commissioners' workshops. And technically, I put the public comment section in front of the commissioners' workshops for the public to bring issues to the commissioners for future discussion. Now, then we would have, as Commissioner Coluzzi mentioned, discussion of different topics on our workshop with the idea that as we move to the next meeting, then if there is a vote and more discussion on that same topic, at that point in time, the public is able to speak to it. The comments in the early part of the meetings are really to bring up topics that are important to the public as well as things that we might put onto future agendas. Whereas when we get to our regular meetings, the second meeting of the month, that's the time to discuss what we've already discussed in the previous meeting and to discuss it further if in fact we are going to have a vote or even if we don't have the vote. If there's no further public comments, we'll just move right into the city manager report.
One more.
Thank you.
My name is Sandy Bisgood. I'm not a resident of the city of Rehoboth. I live in Lewis. And I wanted to make just a couple of really quick points. First, there was a mention from the representative of the League of Women Voters that perhaps they could apply for a waiver as a 501c3. And that's a good idea, I think. But there may also be times where somebody is organizing something. It's a time-sensitive issue, and they don't have time to affiliate with a 501c3. And we need to be taking that into account. The other thing, I do appreciate having a draft of the expressive activity permit proposal. It's a little hard to read it and listen to what's going on at the same time, but I appreciate having it. I got about halfway down the page and noticed under denial of permit, the expressive activity may be denied if it's deemed to be a special event as defined by Chapter 230, special events. And that seems to me to be kind of a conflict, as was pointed out, that the two pieces of legislation may coexist together and be a little difficult. It seems like it could be a little easy to deny something under expressive activities, say, oh no, that's a special event. Sorry, you should have been here 8 weeks ago. So that's all I wanted to say.
And just as has been said, the commissioners haven't even started to discuss the expressive ordinance that she's put in front of us. So again, it's the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm here today. Might be my only chance.
Thank you. We'll move right into the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The wastewater rate study working group has been meeting about once a week. We're making good progress, but we're not quite ready to make a recommendation to the commissioners, so that will have to be sometime, hopefully in April. City contractors will be performing street tree work starting the first week in March, weather permitting. The goals are to provide clearance over streets and sidewalks and to maintain the health of city trees. In order to prune all city trees in the shortest cycle possible, there will be no additional work beyond what has already been contracted. All citizen requests should be made through a tree inspection request that can be found on the city's website. The primary areas to be addressed now in March are the 1st to 3rd blocks of South Rehoboth, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Olive, Maryland, and Baltimore avenues, and then the 1st and 2nd blocks of Oak Avenue, the 1st block of Park Avenue. Notification letters have been sent out to those within the vicinity of the tree work. City auction will be held on Saturday, March 30th, right here in the Convention Center. The auction will be held by Emmert Auction, and more information will be posted soon on the website. Very happy to report the pavilion construction is complete at Stokely Street Park. Power is being coordinated with Delmarva Power to connect the facility with power, and a ribbon cutting and photo op will be scheduled for early spring. The city greatly appreciates the work by Senator Lopez to secure community transportation funds in the amount of $13,000 to pay for approximately 1/2 of this project.
City Manager Lynn, I hate to interrupt you, but I just wanted to offer that I had spoken to the president of the Homeowners Association of Country Club, and they were absolutely ecstatic with the quick assembling of the pavilion, and they were thrilled to have it. So I hope that's shared by everyone.
Excuse me, how much was this? How much was it, the project? I didn't realize they only paid half.
The approximate cost is about $26,000.
Oh, okay. So you had the authority to just, we had discretionary funding for the additional $13K, is that, and you decided to put it there for the pavilion?
Correct.
Is that what happened? Thank you.
Members of the Water and Wastewater Departments last week attended the Delaware Rural Water Association Conference conference discussed relevant topics to local municipalities and provided training to operators. Just a brief recap and a look into the future. We have 46 pay stations, new pay stations being installed sometime in April. Maryland, Baltimore, Wilmington, Delaware, and First Street. The marking for the locations of these pay stations has been completed. Miss Utility has marked the utility locations on the streets for these pay stations. And starting today or this week, weather dependent, city's contractor will be installing 46 concrete foundations and ground rods at the predetermined locations. So these Luke Cosmo pay stations that we've discussed before will be ready and up and running for the season in May. The Director of Public Works and the Water Department have been working with Delaware Rural Water and inspectors from HydroCorps to implement a cross-connection control program that will protect the water system from possible contamination from backflow events. The first step in this process is a survey of commercial properties. This is being done at commercial properties to identify problems and educate customers of required backflow installation and testing. HydroCorps will begin sending out letters on behalf of the city to commercial water customers only and high-risk locations that have been already identified. Letters and surveys are scheduled to begin in March and will include surveys of city facilities. Any costs associated with the replacement, modification, installation, and/or testing of these backflow prevention assemblies is the responsibility of the property owner or occupant of the commercial business. And as a follow-up to the last meeting with the agreement signed with the Cohen Law Group to develop a comprehensive ordinance for small cell sites, they're expected to have a draft ordinance by mid-March. Last week, staff and I met with AT&T representatives to invite them to the table for their input and review of the ordinance, and the same has been done with Verizon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
City Solicitor?
The only thing to mention, Mr. Mayor, and I think it's been reported, there was a FOIA decision issued, and because of that, the Personnel Committee and the Water and Wastewater Rate Committee are both meeting now in public forum, and agendas will be posted.
Great, thank you. We're going to move right into a presentation by Delaware Natural Resource Department Resilient Community Partnership Program. Evan Miller.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public. I hope everybody had a great weekend. So if you recall, back in June, the city of Rehoboth Beach took the lead and submitted a letter of interest to the Delaware Coastal Programs Office for a Resilient Communities Partnership Grant. It's a program that leverages federal funding provided by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, to help Delaware communities improve their planning and preparation capabilities for responding to coastal hazards. The Delaware Coastal Programs Office has utilized a Resilient Communities Partnership in the past with the city of Newcastle and Slaughter Beach, and the city was successful in receiving that grant. So that grant provides technical assistance in the amount of roughly $75,000. Our partnership is made up of the city of Lewis, town of Henlopen Acres, city of Rehoboth Beach, town of Dewey, town of Bethany, town of South Bethany, and the town of Fenwick Island. And there are two particular deliverables that the partnership hopes to accomplish. The first is a summary of mitigation options or best management practices that will increase stormwater infiltration and reduce impervious surface coverage. And then the second is to develop model ordinances for each municipality to control the impervious surface coverage. So we'll be working very closely with two contractors, specifically AECOM and KCI, to complete those two deliverables. We have a target completion of August, maybe early September. And we provide monthly updates at the Association of Coastal Towns on the status of the partnership. So without further ado, I want to bring up Kelly Valencic. Kelly is the Planner and Coastal Training Program Coordinator with DNREC's Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy.
Thanks, Evan. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. So thank you so much for that, Evan. That was a great overview of our project. Just to introduce myself to you all, I am a planner, like Evan said, with our DNREC Delaware Coastal Programs Office. I am a current resident of Smyrna, but I grew up in the city of Newcastle, and Rehoboth is like my Disneyland because we came down here like when I was growing up for vacation, and it's absolutely wonderful to be back working here. Let's see, I'm using the arrows here. So as Evan said, City of Rehoboth, along with a consortium of other coastal municipalities from the ocean front in Delaware, applied for one of our Resilient Community Partnership grants from the Coastal Programs Office back last year. And we just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of what the project will be delivering to you all, so you have an idea of what's to come. I believe Sharon briefed you a couple times before about what we'll be doing, but just to put a face with our name, so I wanted to come down and talk to you all this morning and say, kind of like, look out for us. We're going to be talking in the community a little bit. So a brief background about the Delaware Coastal Programs Office. We were authorized back in the 1970s to help Delaware manage its coastal resources for a variety of purposes. Keeping those resources sustainable, but also dealing with things like energy siting, managing our environment, wetlands, birds and bunnies and all that fun stuff, but also the human use of our coastal resources and ensuring that those are going to be sustainable uses for years and generations to come. Our office is made up of two different parts, the Delaware Coastal Management Program, as well as the Delaware National Estuarine Research Reserve, and I sit halfway between the two of them. So I get the best of both worlds at my office. And some of the things that we do cover research and monitoring. We do that ourselves. We have scientists on staff that are going out every day and checking out the marsh and natural resources around us to see what condition they're in. We also do conservation and stewardship, so we do these at our own properties. We have two parcels or two segments of land in Dover and in Townsend, so we manage those for environmental benefit, and we try to share our best practices with our neighbors and community at large, so we can share tips and tricks that work best and help sustain our forests and streams and meadows. We also do education and outreach to school kids. We do field trips. They can come to our reserve and look at our exhibits. We have a marsh boardwalk that goes out over a tidal inlet. We also go into schools, and we also teach teachers how to better educate their students about our coastal and estuary areas, as well as public outreach at events like UD's Coast Day and things like that. I come from the planning and training shop where we are providing our resources and technical expertise to communities throughout the state of Delaware as they are planning for the managed use of your coastal resources. So we actually consider the entire state of Delaware coastal, so don't just think it's just like the ones right along the Delaware Bay or the ocean front, but the entire state is coastal in our view. So we're here to help everyone. And then the program that I manage is the Resilient Community Partnership Program, which Evan spoke about before, which is in place to help communities for their progression to resiliency or being better prepared for any hazards that come their way from the coastal area, and then help them take steps to be more resilient so they're better able to bounce back if they experience any adverse impacts. We have a few simple steps that we take communities through as they work in this program with us. This is a competitive program, so they apply with a letter of intent or interest, and we choose the best project that we think will go the furthest. So Rehoboth and the group of coastal municipalities was the lucky winner this year, and you guys had a great proposal, and we're very excited to be working with you. So some of the first steps that we do is we conduct an inventory of the community values and assets. So this is working with our local stakeholders and community members to see what is at stake, what do you want to protect, what do you want in place for many years to come. Then we work to conduct a vulnerability assessment and look at different impacts that might be coming your way from both short-term and long-term impacts, so things like hurricanes and nor'easters, as well as looking to the future and what the impacts might be from climate change and sea level rise and even heat impacts sometimes. Then we help the community walk through thinking through some trade-offs and what they can do better to adapt to some of those impacts that might come. and whether that's on the ground planning or putting in new segments of your comprehensive plan or hazard mitigation plan, whatever that might be, we come up with a list of options. And then we take you right up to the point where you're ready to take implementation action. So moving dirt or on the ground action, we can actually not do with our grant, but we can provide you with a report that will help you move forward with applying for future grants that help you do that, either from like the federal government or different sections of our state agencies. But what's really important to us is that we're incorporating community input throughout this planning process. And we've had community stakeholders from each of the different municipalities already at our planning meetings so far. That I think our first one was in August. We've held them bi-monthly since, and we have more plans for community input throughout the summertime. So just a brief background, I'm going to whiz through these because I know you guys have a very busy day today. So our first project was with the town of Slaughter Beach in the northernmost part of Sussex County, and we helped them evaluate their risks to coastal hazards and sea level rise. They have an average age of 65 in their community, so they didn't want to plan too far in the future. They wanted to think about something that was more manageable to them. So they wanted to plan for 20 years, and at that point, they'll have about 1 foot of sea level rise. So we showed the public and stakeholders what they might look like. They described to us some of the impacts they're already seeing from coastal storms and higher tides. And then we showed them the future impact of sea level rise, and then helped walk them through some different adaptation options that they were able to kind of vote with sticky dots, whether they liked it or hated it, up on there. And then we came up with a final plan based on their feedback that would help them move towards some adaptation options. This is our report, namely being like a flashing road warning sign so they can see if the road's flooded further down, so they don't have to drive really, really far, see it's flooded, and come back around and try to take another one into town. The next project that we worked with was the City of Newcastle, and the City of Newcastle has done a lot of individual segmented research about their different assets in town. If you've been there, you might know that they have like the 4 earthen dike system that's helped protect them from some floodwaters from the Delaware River. So that's been really studied, and they know a lot about that, but they wanted a comprehensive view of what's going on with the city with regards to coastal hazards. So we formed a task force to help us think through some of those things, look at past reports and collect it all together. We held public workshops to get input. We showed them maps of different inundation scenarios into the future, showed different assets that might get wet in the future, and help them think through some adaptation options that would be best to take for those, and delivered that report. So for you all, like Evan said, we've started our project over the summertime. Is when I think we finally signed off on everything and got underway. But we're going to be doing a comprehensive study of impervious surface coverage within each of the municipalities that are on the project. There's issues with redevelopment of some of the older homes into bigger property surface coverage areas, so really big houses with lots of driveway and decking, and looking at the impact that might have on your stormwater runoff into the future, and how to manage that stormwater runoff so you have great water quality here in your cities and don't have flooding issues. So these wonderful things, like thinking about stormwater runoff, you know, the water hits the cars and the dog waste, and then it flows into the stream. So we want to try to avoid a lot of that fun stuff. So this is just our list of municipalities on the project, like we said before, from the city of Lewis all the way down south to the town of Fenwick Island is included on the project. And I'll be going out to their town councils as well to give them a brief update about this project too. So that'll be coming this spring, that I'll finish those up. And then as Evan said, this project is really going to be done in 2 parts, and we're using the funds from our program to hire 2 contractors to help us with this project. The first step is going to be done by AECOM, and they are going to do a summary of best practices that are out there for managing stormwater runoff. So we're going to be looking at what's being done in Delaware already, what's being done in the region, and what some of the technical experts on this subject matter have said that could work for communities. I'm putting that together in kind of like a playbook for you all so you can read through and see what might work best for each municipality. So we know that Rehoboth has different issues with managing runoff than the town of Dewey Beach versus the town of South Bethany or something like that. So whatever works best for you. And then we're going to be working with the contractor KCI, and Debbie File over here is going to be helping us out. And they are going to be going out and talking with city stakeholders and the public to help develop recommendations for best practices that fit in with your current ordinances, and also future model ordinances that might help you out with managing your stormwater runoff as well. And this is going to take until about September 2019, which is when we think we'll be coming back to you to report on the project. So just a brief overview of the project schedule. We're kind of in the research and writing part of the best practices right now. Then we're going to start going out to our community stakeholders and doing public outreach over the summertime. I think there's a couple public events that Debbie already knows that she can go to engage with members of the public at different communities. And then we're going to be going through and identifying what works best for, or what we can propose works best for each municipality on the project. And then hopefully at the end of the summer, we'll be able to come back to you all, hopefully after the summertime rush is over, maybe in September, to report on what our findings were in the project. So hopefully into the future, with some of that information, you can put into place really cool things that help ease some of that stormwater runoff and convey water to areas where it can slow down and infiltrate and remove pollution. This is just a couple shots of different pictures that I found online that look kind of cool of what you can do that looks pretty, and it also works, and it might help you even save on stormwater infrastructure costs in the future too. And then there's also a couple project bonuses that we definitely wanted to point out to you guys today. So all of the recommendations and potential practices that we're going to be putting forth in our report could also be things that might work for you all if you were to become a part of the EPA's MS4 permitting requirements. And some of those things would be asking you to take mitigation steps similar to what we're recommending in the report. So this is going to already deliver that information to you. So if you become a part of that, and if that is a concern, you might have some ideas already in hand. And then we will also be sharing all the best practices at a state level. So we are really appreciative of you guys doing this project, because we can take that information further to the other municipalities in the state that we work with. And then this report will also set you up for a great application for grant funding to get that future implementation funding. So you can deliver this report and cite the report and say, this is what we want to do because we did this whole research, and we know this is our next step. And that will hopefully get you guys some good project funding into the future, way more than $75,000 that we can provide. So go to the federal government with the big guns. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions about the past reports or the past communities we've worked with, all those reports are online on our site here. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email if you have any questions about the projects and more details about the steps that we have going forward. So that's about the end of my presentation today. So I can take questions if you have time. Or yeah.
Kelly, thank you very much for this. It's very fascinating, and I'm sure it will be very fruitful. On your project schedule slide, the third one down where you start to indicate the public outreach, could you talk a little bit more of where you think you may be inserting yourself or exactly how that will work?
So I might toss it over to Debbie because, sorry. Because she's going to be doing the load of that work. So.
Hi, Debbie from KCI. So we just got the PO signed from the from DNREC, I think within the last 15 days because of the federal shutdown to get the funding. So we'll be meeting with each municipality. Some municipalities we are celebrating Earth Day and doing an outreach for some other projects that are already underway. With Rehoboth, we'd like to meet to find out what's the best way to find out what the public wants, as we've heard a little bit tonight. Is it an event? Is it an outreach workshop? Is it tied into another large event? Is it an environmental committee? So we'll be meeting with each municipality to determine what the best approach is. But at this time, we have not kicked that off yet.
Okay, so just to put a fine point on it, you will be meeting with city staff? Who is it that you'll be meeting with?
So I would first initially contact Sharon and then ask who needs to be at the table to move forward with that project.
Okay, perfect.
Sound good?
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. This was very very good, and I'm very excited about the prospect of this. I think it's very good for the future of the city, and that's the way we should be looking towards taking care of these types of issues. So thank you very much.
Sure thing, and thank you all for having me here today. It was a great opportunity to speak with you all.
Kelly, another question, and thanks, Evan, for kind of leading us to this wonderful opportunity. I think this is great for our community and all the coastal communities, and I think it's going to provide a lot for us to think about. One of the things that I think about right away is that we have a planning commission who is charged with working diligently in the coming months for our next comprehensive development plan as required by the state. Where's the integration going to be so that we're not each of these groups going in different directions, and all good directions, but there needs to be an integration.
Yeah. Sure. So maybe what I can suggest is that Debbie works with Sharon to pull in some of the planning commission members.
You probably don't know, we're actually consulting to do the comprehensive development plan. So I think that's a great point. There's several studies going on. Matter of fact, I'm here for 2 reasons today. One is to hear the National Main Street survey on the businesses. So any initiatives going on at any time during the comprehensive development plan, we want to make sure we capture those, note those, and take the information from all the resources. So depending on the timing of this, I assume this will be mentioned, information and data collected from it, and some of the initiatives move forward in the comprehensive plan. Great comment, thank you.
Thank you, it's critical, and it's so easy for us to each kind of go on our own route here on these things.
And there's a lot of initiatives in the city.
And then realize 12 months down the road that we didn't connect when we should have.
Absolutely.
Well, and I'm so glad Commissioner Byrne brings up connecting the dots, because I have a meeting Friday of the Advisory Committee on Trees. Great. And we're always talking about stormwater runoff and impervious surfaces and so forth. So at a minimum, the timing is great for me to share with them as part of our path forward.
Absolutely.
To understand and know that this is going on. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, it's also good for the commissioners to put a name with the face. Debbie, for example, excuse me, will be at the meeting, the Planning Commission meeting this coming Friday, leading the local comprehensive plan data with the Planning Commission. And Kelly, of course, we've been meeting with since last June, close to last June when we applied for this. So we're meeting in the meantime, but we wanted to give you an update of where we are, at least up to this point. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Debbie. Next, we're going to move right into a presentation by Rehoboth Main Street on the Capstone project. And Karen is right back there. And just informationally for the commissioners and the public, this is on new business D. You can just take that off because I mistakenly put that on twice. So new business D is happening right now with this presentation.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. I have Ryan with us. He is the chair of our Economic Vitality Committee, and he will be the one presenting our findings today.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So one of our biggest initiatives with the Economic Vitality Committee for Main Street is to really conduct surveys, get feedback, and this is the first survey of a set of 3 that we'll be doing in a 12-month period. This one was targeted towards businesses specifically. The next one will be targeted towards residents, and then the third will be visitors. And the whole process of this is to work with the University of Delaware, have some students involved, and this is their capstone project. So they come down, we get together with them, create the survey, they go out, reach out to businesses, and basically gain feedback, compile it, present to their class and school for their graduation project, and give us a list of deliverables. And then from there, it's important that we redo the same survey a year later, and then we could really see trends on, which direction we're moving, where there's, common feedback amongst businesses, then amongst residents, and then visitors. So this is the first of 3, and we'll go through it. This is 6 students from the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration up at University of Delaware. And this was done in October, and they presented their findings at their capstone course in December. And they really wanted to be down here to present themselves, but they're all moved on doing internships and things like that. So I get the honor of sharing the findings with you folks. All right, so I went over the background already. The methods that we came up with was with 6 students. They're going to come down. They came and met with us. We shared information back and forth about the local community, and then they broke up into groups of 2 so they could cover as much area as possible. We sent out emails to all the businesses, and then we said, they're going to be here on Sunday, October 21st, to come to your business specifically, and if you'd like to set up an appointment, we gave them that opportunity as well ahead of time. So there was a few businesses that set up a specific time for them to come, but they split up, a couple on Rehoboth Ave, Wilmington, and a couple on Baltimore, as well as the other side streets, the Olive Aves, and so on. I kind of went over background. So I'm going to go into methods here. When creating the survey, a lot of this was their input as well. So it was part of their capstone project to really be involved with the whole implementation, creation of the survey, finding the data that they collected and putting it all together. So we worked closely with them doing that. And finding. So the first question that they came up with was, how long have you been at your business? And we had about 50 filled out responses from the businesses, and most you could see have been in their current business for over 15 years. Some that have been shorter is because they've moved to a larger store or a larger business. But signifies that Rehoboth business owners are loyal to the town and have a strong standing connections to it. Is your business year-round or seasonal? And 40 out of the 50 replied year-round. So, while this is good for the town's economy, it could also have negative externalities such as loss of availability and a rise in price of parking in the off-season, and businesses could have further trouble finding year-round employees. What made you select Rehoboth? Almost 50% was derived on location. And then another big percentage, 27, was prior living arrangements. So folks that had already lived here decided they loved the area and wanted to open a business here. The beach atmosphere was conducive, conducive to their business success, and the higher income bracket of residents and tourists was also a draw. Has your clientele changed in the recent years, and is there a correlation between that and the success of your business? Biggest consensus was that clientele in downtown Rehoboth has not changed significantly in the recent years, but many businesses also said that they have to update their merchandise and offerings to a more modern crowd. Many also mentioned new wave of day trippers at lower income levels. And to keep in mind too, this was all types of businesses, from retail to restaurants to art galleries. More than half the businesses surveyed expressed they had problems with gaining reliable seasonal or year-round employees. Many attribute that to the affordability of downtown living. Do you have any opinions regarding downtown parking in Rehoboth? What is your opinion regarding parking, transportation, and means in bringing visitors to the downtown beach area? Many express that meters are too expensive and public transportation is either insufficient or not applicable to their higher end clientele. A few also express the need for a parking garage with variable rates for more parking during the summer months. Do you own or lease your property? Most lease. We had 25 responses to this question. 19 businesses leased their location and 6 owned. And I think why we didn't have full 50 responses, because if the business owner himself or herself was not present, they had spoken with the management there, and they may not be able to give full disclosure or full knowledge about, you know, how their lease is going and their dealings with their landlords and whatnot. So overall, are you positive, neutral, or concerned about the future of your business? You see 68.1 positive. Neutral 6.4, concerned 25%. So then they broke it down into type of business specific questions. So we had some restaurant questions. Does your business have available space to create outdoor eating? If so, is this something you would consider adding? Most businesses did not have the space for outdoor eating, but they would consider it if it was available. Those that did have the space already used it. Other businesses were in the process of building outdoor eating space. Retail, do you feel Rehoboth as a whole attracts customers that most fit the profile of your target audience? Yes. Charm, characteristics of the town, restaurants, and the beach help. Few outliers claim there were too many day trippers and they were taking parking of the desired clientele for their businesses. Side street business. Do you feel that visitors to Rehoboth Beach are aware of the variety of stores and restaurants on side streets? No, many of the side street businesses feel that most of the shoppers concentrate on Rehoboth Avenue. They would like to see more promotion of their stores to attract customers onto their streets. They would also like to see more maps and signage throughout to move traffic from Rehoboth Avenue to the side streets that are parallel. What is the one thing you could think that could be done to attract more customers and businesses to your street? And a big one was signage, even bigger than parking.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, did you give them a list of answers for check boxes, or did they just give us these are answers they came up with independently?
Correct. We did not give them check boxes. They came up and just put the common ones that looks like there was, you know, more than one.
Just to give you a little bit of background, I went up and met with the students, and there was a course of action that we did with them. We had to, first of all, convince them to work with us, and they did. And then we did FaceTime and other types of outreach to them to make sure they were on track. They were the ones, as part of their capstone, to create these questions. So we had to be really careful as to they were supposed to be graded on their work. So that's pretty much where that all came from. And when they came down, we had a lot of positive feedback about how polite they were and how caring they were. They did meet and speak one-on-one and met probably at one time, a couple of them were like 45 minutes. So. But for the most part, they were like 15-minute interviews. And there were no checkbox, it was communication.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, proposed solutions. Streetscape improvements, advertising, and general parking solutions. Streetscape improvements. The side streets were a big one here. One of the largest concerns was Baltimore, Wilmington, Lake and Olive. And then a bunch of different, solutions in there. Create and identify each location, differentiating from other streets, using landmarks to provide orientation, cues, memorable locations, create well-structured paths, create regions of differing visual character. Putting attractive signage to help with letting folks know that there's alternate businesses on streets other than Rehoboth Avenue. I think that was a big one. Providing landscaping improvements and artistic motifs on benches, decorative bollards, etc. Advertising online, more of the businesses, events, and other community features of Rehoboth and social media, tourist websites, Main Street webpage, and then highlight the character, charm, quality. Cross-branding between multiple businesses, creating coupons that promote other shops, restaurant businesses, strengthen the community ties. Parking, increase of metered spots, allow for an increase of foot traffic on side streets, may lower the congestion of Rehoboth Avenue. Free parking and metered spots during off-season can cost the city money. Free parking considered a public good that has to be maintained and cared for. All year operational meters created a steady stream of revenue. Building a parking garage. I won't go into those bullet points, but I'm sure you've heard it plenty of times. Our conclusion, we thought this was a great experience for not only Main Street, but for the students. They were really dedicated to it. With their class schedule, it only allowed them to be down here one day. So we tried to do some of the work ahead of time to make sure that businesses were prepared for them coming in. And their professor, Jonathan Justice up there at the University of Delaware, was really, really thrilled with the outcome. And he's already on board with getting us another team for the next couple months to be able to identify, emerging trends with the residents as well, and kind of get that baseline set for when we do it again, that we could see, how it's moved and how we're doing. So, anything to add, Karen?
What is your timeline for the three? We said 3 surveys: business, residential, and visitors. Curious what your timeline is for visitors. Obviously, for me, I think it would need to be in that window of summertime primarily, possibly. But what is your
It's going to be as
thought?
close to summer as possible, but probably in the late spring, only because the students aren't in school then in the summer, in peak season, so we got to do it. So we'll try and do it as late as possible before they're done.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I was talking to Professor Justice, Dr. Justice, about it as well. I would really like for us to, we might have to do some of that legwork ourselves. We may have to be able to do that in the summertime and not just focus on downtown, but also go out on the highway and ask people questions out there. That may have to be something that our group in Main Street may have to initiate with our group, and maybe even volunteers that might want to do it as well. But for the most part, I would love for it to be in this summer, but his suggestion is to go with the residents now and then redo this again in the fall for the businesses, because we're all really interested in seeing how the trends would change and who else can we talk to. This was on a cold, windy Sunday, and that was really the only time that they could come down. And we wanted to make sure it was in between events. But this time, since it's out there that this is taking place, we would like to strategize to get more people involved with the next survey.
I don't know that it's in the cards for you, but to me, we've got different visitor population. The summer population, in the height of summer, might have one set of perspective and answers different than those in the off season or the shoulders. So I don't.
I mean, that might be an opportunity
Yeah.
for us to do that, you know, just like the whole year.
And maybe we could squeeze a fourth one in the summer for the, you know, the folks that are from the Mid-Atlantic and not Lewis or Milton that may come down for the weekend or just the day on Saturday to visit.
Karen and Ryan, I would also add, and thank you very much for this good work. I think this is wonderful, and this data is going to inform our CDP, and that'll be something I think I can ask in another question. But similar to different types of visitors, you know, we also have 70–80% of our homeowners, you know, that are, in a sense, our residents, are not here. And so how do we get to them as well so that they can provide some input? Because they have a very vested interest in this city, but you're not going to find them on the doorstep.
Yes. We have 2 homeowners associations that we're really excited to be working with, or they're excited to be working with. And along with that, we're going to encourage them to do a survey online so that they can capture them. The idea is to do that, work with the 2 homeowners associations and also guide and get information online. But also one day they would come down and meet with residents in person, hopefully here at City Hall. And we would break it up by alphabetical order so that there's not everybody coming at the same time. And then a couple of the students would be walking around town, seeing people walking dogs and stopping them and asking them if they live here. So they're going to try to be really creative about it and make sure that they grab everyone.
Would you consider doing a mailing to just a little postcard or something to all the residents and let them know that there's a survey online?
We were, since
it's
this
not that expensive to do, like a little postcard that you know kind of lets folks know to participate or gives them.
That's something we could bring up to the board. And the other idea is also if maybe the city could help us with a mass email, since you have the list of all the residents in town. That might be less expensive, and we might be able to reach them better since not everybody lives here.
We don't have the emails for all people.
Okay.
And I don't know what percent that we have emails for, but we don't have an all-inclusive email list. So it would, you know, in order to really touch base with people, it's going to have to be a postal address.
Yeah.
I think the emails that we have captured for our bulletins and things like that are non-discriminatory. They can be anybody inside the city, outside the city. So I'm not sure how helpful they would be.
All right. Thank you. Great suggestion.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions about, I didn't want to interrupt you if you have additional comment.
Oh, it's okay. I was saying this one's, we were discussing it at our last economic vitality meeting. It's a little trickier as far as getting to all the residents as opposed to going to knocking on a door of a business. So we're trying to strategize on the most effective ways to be able to reach as many people as possible.
Well, and particularly if you want it to be representative so that there's some real science behind the data, that it's truly representative. Yeah.
I just have a couple questions about the data. You mentioned you got about 50 responses out of, what was the universe? What was the total universe?
There's
200?
Yeah, we reached out to 200 and plus businesses, and not only did they had the information themselves to reach back out to us.
Do you think it was closer to, if it's 200 plus, would it be closer to 300 or closer to 200?
Well, downtown, I guess there's like 260 some businesses downtown.
260-ish?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, the whole idea is to, get them as much as we can. There's also others that are, they're tucked away. There's a lot of businesses that you can see, storefronts, but there's a lot of them that are tucked away upstairs or that sort of thing. And obviously we're in April to reach them. But they did break out and they did. I was hoping that we would get a larger return on this. But again, this is their first one, and then they'll continue to learn and grow with the next group.
Sure. And then on question 6, do you have any opinions regarding downtown parking in Rehoboth Beach? If you can help me with this one. The first bullet about the meters being too expensive. And then the second bullet says, a few also expressed the need for a parking garage. Is there any way to kind of quantify what that few meant out of the 50?
That was not a, let me see, where was that? Was this one right here, right? You want to go back to it?
It just caught my eye with the use of the term "a few," because when that gets extrapolated out for recommendations and so forth, I think it's very fair for us to know what the few.
We could reach out to them.
Sure, at some point, because this will be an ongoing discussion.
Absolutely, and the more info we could provide,
Yeah.
better.
Yes.
Even the deliverables mentions a few too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, you're probably aware that, that the Planning Commission, as they're developing the long-range comprehensive development plan, has started some surveying already and have, I think, fairly extensive plans for surveying similar groups. This data can certainly inform their process. And so, you know, like I said to the last group, there really needs to be some integration here, some discussion, so that this, you know, doesn't go on a shelf now, but that it really lends itself toward helping us plan for the future.
That's why bringing this back in the fall, I think, is important. Like I said, I would like to have, one idea was for us to hit the street in the summer and grab the tourist information, and then have that information, have the students take that information and create something for us in the fall. But I think it's really important to go back and hit the businesses harder the second time.
And if you haven't, or if you're not planning, you should plan. I think you sit with the chair of that committee and let them know what you're doing, what your plans are for the next two surveys in addition to this one, so that, again, they're not doing exactly what you're doing, and that you can coordinate together as the months go by.
Yes.
Because they are going to increasingly be on a fast track to move the CDP effort forward.
And Ryan's done a great job of grabbing more people to be on this committee too. And they're diverse, they have a lot of great experience.
This will be very helpful to that process.
Yeah, and I would think along those lines, Karen, if you could work with Debbie File, because she is going to be working with the CDP and the Planning Commission over the next 18 months, and they're going to have a number of different meetings, but they're also going to be reaching out not only to the businesses, as she mentioned, but to the residents as well, and you could probably cross-coordinate those two things, and I think that would probably be helpful to get more people from a residential perspective.
Yes, she has a great resource. We do know each other. She reached out. We both were communicating before standing up here, and you're attending the National Main Street. Yes.
Great.
The conference.
And Karen, just one last thing. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I was looking at the executive summary and the recommendations on page 1. There's 3, and the one that moved into the first position is parking garage. Yes. So if you can reconcile at some point the word few to parking garage as the number 1 recommendation, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, we will work on that. All right.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you. That was really good.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to move, there is no old business. We'll move right into new business, which is the discussion of existing lease agreements with the city, proper associated fees, and possible policy moving forward. And I think in your packet there is a compilation of the number of leases that are outstanding at the moment, and we can start the discussion.
Mayor, just on background, I'm assuming that this is a comprehensive list?
Yes.
So it is everything that we're aware of?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I guess the first thing is, you know, I need to comment on the agenda topic. You know, FOIA requires specificity, more specificity when you know it. And, you know, are we truly only talking about lease agreements? Because lease agreements to me is the Snyder Candy Building, it's the Scout Building, it's those properties. You know, what we also have in front of us are license
I see what you mean.
agreements, and that's not listed on the agenda.
Is this all assets that we own or just assets where we have a leasing agreement? You know, facilities
I
or
think
buildings?
the intention of this discussion was to talk about licenses, as Commissioner Mills says. A license is a lesser interest in property than a lease, so I think that gives you some leeway in what you discussed today. But these are just licenses as to real property the city has. They're not leases to any kinds of structural improvements that we have.
Well,
so this is generally when there's a retaining wall, when there's an overhang at McQuay's, for example, McQuay's Old Market, now Egg. You know, those certain things, when they encroach on city property, in certain instances, the city has chosen to license them so that the user can continue to use that public space.
So, Glenn, I just want to make sure I'm following what you're saying. We have a document in front of us that is entitled lease agreements, but what we're talking about is licenses?
Yes.
Does that seem odd to you, or is it just me?
People confuse leases and licenses so commonly. I mean, I guarantee in this conversation today, at least 3 of you will use the word lease instead of license when you should be saying license.
Well,
so the document should say license.
It should say.
It should say license.
But if it says licenses, does it contain different information? That's what I'm trying to ask. I'm not trying to be obstinate, just trying to ask, would the content be different if it were labeled licenses versus leases?
No, the content's
it would not.
Correct. The content's correct, yes.
Okay, so there's no leases in here, it's only licenses.
That's my understanding, right.
Okay.
Okay.
So it would be a bigger list if there were
leases.
Leases, right? So this is not inclusive of all real property that we have.
Well, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure I agree with that. You know, I have a neighbor that has a license. If he read this, he would not be concerned because it says lease. However, it said license. He might be concerned and decide to come to this meeting. So I think we're doing a disservice by talking about it. But the document that I have says lease agreement billings, and it has license agreements on there, and it also has lease agreements on there. So they ought to be segregated, number one, into 2 different things. And I think that the intent of this conversation goes back to when we were talking about the pending license agreement for the sandcastle over here, when we brought it up, specifically talking about license agreements, and we said, let's bring it up and talk about it. We did not say we were going to review leases or anybody's leases. Listed on our list is the Chamber of Commerce lease.
Yeah, you're right. There are
of
leases
the
on there as
railroad
well.
building. We're not talking about that. So we're commingling things.
So is the consensus of the commissioners to postpone this and put it back on the agenda for the next meeting and just discuss licenses only, and then therefore we would take off a couple of these properties that are on here that are clearly leases?
I think I'd suggest that we just put the whole thing off until the next meeting, mainly because it's just unclear, and some clarification, I think, is in order.
I would like to see just a complete list of all the real property and what is a lease and what's licensed, just to know, so we have a complete baseline from which to have this discussion.
Right.
You know, it's just brought up more questions than the answers from me.
I agree with that.
That's
And
fine,
then-
but we should segregate them.
Let's
Agree.
agree.
One list of
Agree.
licenses, one.
Agree.
Yeah,
But I would love
I
to see
agree
a
with that.
complete list, but segregated, of course.
Glenn, I'm not sure how the city legally differentiates lease from license. Are you able to give us that difference right now, or is that something?
Well,
that,
it's not the way the city designates them. It's a legal concept. A lease has a greater interest in property than a license. So a license, generally, the city can terminate it on very little notice. For example, in our license agreements, we give a 90-day notice provision. We don't have to have any good reason to terminate it. We can terminate it given 90 days notice. A lease, generally, the law says you've got the lessee has a larger interest in property. We can't kick somebody out, for example. We can't kick the Chamber of Commerce out without going through certain amounts of due process before we can remove them. So a license certainly or a lease creates a greater interest in real property. So generally where somebody has a retaining wall encroaching or a set of stairs encroaching on city property, we view that as a license, something that should be licensed because it's a structural improvement. It's not going to kick somebody out of their home if we say you have to remove those stairs or you have to remove that retaining wall. So those sorts of situations are generally viewed more appropriate for license agreements versus where an organization or a family is moving into a structure that the city owns. In that instance, we would look toward a lease agreement.
Great, thank you. Is it your legal sense that the city has been quite consistent in applying those definitions to
in applying the definitions, I think there's some policy discussions for you all to have as to when licensing public property is and is not appropriate. I think that's what's generated this discussion most recently. So we will, Sharon and I, the city manager and I, will work together to break these out into lease agreements versus license agreements and try and give you another piece to work with at a future meeting.
That's helpful, thank you.
And so are we going to specifically be talking about license agreements, or is it licenses and lease agreements? Because
I would think it's licensing based on what he just said.
I would say let's do one at a time, yeah.
Well, I think Commissioner Schlosser suggested that we have a list of licenses and separately a list of leases. And I see no reason why we wouldn't talk about those at the same time. They're different subjects, but I think it's useful to kind of have a feel. I understand maybe you want to do it at different times, but.
What would be the discussion of the leases? I mean, I can understand the licensing agreements because it's
maybe
continuous.
it doesn't need to be a meeting, but I think we should, as commissioners, know what real property is that the city owns.
And I think
that can be just a list.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be up for discussion.
Talking about leases or putting it on the agenda is liable to be alarmist. The people that don't have leases are going to say, well, what do they talk about? Are they going to try to terminate them early? Are they going to try to increase our price? So I would say that's off the table. The lease agreement that we just did, every word in here says lease, leaseor, and license agreement. There's no mention of lease. So,
right. So I think, as the solicitor said, the solicitor and the city manager can work together with splitting off this list. We can have a discussion at the April workshop of licensing agreements and have the licensing list at that point in time. And hopefully also between now and then, we would get a list of the actual leases, structural leases that we have outstanding. And we don't necessarily need to have a discussion of that at the April workshop. If there is a need at some time in the future, we could bring that up. But that way we get the list. Does that work?
Perfect, thank you.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, thank you. We'll move right into the second new business, which is the discussion and introduction of a potential mixed-use zoning district within the city limits. Commissioner Caluzzi, you would ask for this. Because, there's only about 5 properties on there, and I don't know, you know it better.
So the idea today was for me to just introduce the idea for you all to just kind of think about. I feel that mixed use is something that we ought to be thinking about, and oh, okay. So that's the idea today. It's just sort of an introduction. It's sort of throwing it out there for everyone to look at, and so I'll try to keep it brief. Let's see here. Okay.
That's not on the agenda for the public to see, that presentation.
It is on the agenda. I'm sorry.
It's on the agenda, but we do not have a supporting document.
Right. Well, it'll be put on the website. I did not supply it to Ann. My fault.
And we don't have that as well.
No, yeah, everyone's seeing this for the first time. All right.
I appreciate that.
So, definition of a mixed-use structure, simply put, a mixed-use structure is a structure with commercial use on the ground floor with residential use in the floors above the ground floor. There's also, I'm sure you've heard of mixed-use developments. We're really not talking about that here. Being 1 square mile, there's not much we can do in the way of a mixed-use development. But I did want to talk about mixed-use structures. Actually, we do have mixed use here in the city, and a lot of you are familiar with some of them, maybe not all of them, but these are some examples. It's not a complete list. But above the Rehoboth Convenience Store, formerly the pharmacy, there's residences up there, rental residences, as well as the Pink Crab, the Blooming Boutique, that's now vacant, the Bake Shop. Above both of those businesses, there are apartments. Rock Creek Men's Clothing Store, there's an apartment above that. Finn's top floor is rented. And this one, southeast corner of Rehoboth Avenue and 1st Street, you might recognize that. That building was built in 1949, and
2nd Street.
Did I say? Okay, 2nd Street. But you all are familiar with it, I'm sure. You've seen this before. And as you can see, there's commercial on the avenue, and there's commercial on 2nd Street. And those apartments above are rented. So why should we explore mixed use? In my opinion, it potentially will increase the vibrancy of our commercial area year-round, could improve the look and curb appeal of Rehoboth Avenue, provide better options for a builder for the highest and best use of the land, recognize future trends of the next generation, and this one, provide workforce housing. I'm going to talk about my idea of 2 tracks, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think, and if you have other ideas of what we might be looking at. This is the example that I keep going back to. And I want you to know that I have talked to developers who build in town. I've talked to developers who build outside of town. I've talked to commercial real estate agents to have an understanding of this building has been vacant for how long now? I don't know, quite a long time, at least a year, I think. I don't think that it's a particularly a building that lends itself to rental per se. It needs some help in terms of either renovation. What I'd like to see is the idea that this building could be turned into a mixed-use building. We would give developers some changes to the code with a mixed-use zone. So we're talking about zoning here now, which is going to be, I think, a long conversation that we'll have amongst ourselves and with the public, with developers, but I think the time is here. So here's an example of the one that is currently for sale that I think would be a great one to start with. Other places, here's another single level with a variety of small stores. Could that be mixed use? It could be. See, all of this is going to require tearing these buildings down and building new, okay? Another one. So these are all examples. Before I go into that one, my idea of 2 tracks sort of is the idea of workforce housing. So if we go back and talk about the vibrancy of the downtown, you know, part of the problem we have are employees that are in town working, especially mid-level manager types or manager types that work year-round in the town, who live outside of town, who'll drive into town and park in front of their business. You know, if we could have a mixed-use building that would have 1-bedroom apartments above, and the idea is to provide this workforce housing. And I've talked to the developers. Can you build a building that has maybe 2 or 3 levels above the ground floor that would be residential and you would lease out the commercial on that ground floor. Is that workable? And they say yes, but right now in the code, we require if it's a residential that is going to be built on top of commercial, that you have to use residential setbacks. I think that's a mistake. I really do. I think we're talking about the commercial zone, and those setbacks for residential, I believe, were really meant for our residential district and not for the commercial district. The other thing, which is, I think, critical to this, is this workforce type housing would be, you would not have parking included. We have to look at the next generation. We should be planning, and I know Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Sheffer were both at a meeting that I attended where the Delaware Department of Secretary of Transportation talked about the next generation. And a lot of them, they don't own cars. They use Uber, they use Lyft. They are not car-centric like perhaps a lot of us are. And this could really attract them to live in town, to work in town, to shop in town. Having that sort of year-round idea of having these people in town would make, I think, a lot of sense. And also, we're talking about, for example, that Christmas tree building could be torn down and in its place something that would be attractive and useful. Another track could be having condos. So perhaps you would sell the condos above. That would be not workforce housing. I'd rather see workforce housing. But if you did have those condos, then you probably would need to provide parking for those people. So that's my thought. But I have this slide up mainly because how long has that building been vacant? I have no idea, but it's been, you do?
It's been a long time, and I'm pretty sure the upstairs floors have been condemned, and so they can't have anybody living in them.
Right. So
because it's like single room occupancy almost.
Yeah. But I know it's been, I've lived here full time for 15 years. I've been coming down for a lot more than that, and so it's been empty for a long, long, long time. I don't think it should be our legacy to have that building standing there for, gosh, as long as I live anyway. I'd like to see something happen with that building, whether it's renovated or whatever. I think we have to look towards the future here, and it's us as commissioners, city commissioners and our planning commissioners, is to work together to understand where is the city going, where should it be going, where do we want it to go, where do you all want it to go? I think that's where we are. And I think to just let things go along as they are is not necessarily the right way. It's not planning, in my opinion. So again, remove the requirement for the structure to have the setbacks for residential in the commercial area. Remove the requirement for parking. The other thing I wanted to say is promote green roofs. If you're doing new construction, and we're thinking, in my mind, and I'll show you, that's an example. It's bigger than what we would have in a 50 by 100, but you know, the idea of it is you could have a rooftop that is a green roof, and it goes towards what we care about in terms of runoff and whatnot. It would be a wonderful thing for the city to go in that direction, and it would have to be something that obviously developers would want to do, but you know, there's an opportunity for someone to put in a building that would be really something that they would be very proud of to show off. And I think over time, you know, it's a sort of organic growth of this type of development, and that's what I would like to see. Just examples of green roofs, you know, trees, plantings, gardens. You know, these are just examples of things that can be done, as well as like a rooftop deck. I mean, why not? You know, I think that would possibly be something that would be good. takeaways, the future of our fair city. We should be the architects of our future, and it requires proactive planning and not reactive retrofitting. And I think that's where we ought to go and what we ought to be thinking about. So I hope everyone will think about this and we can keep this on our agenda for some time to come.
Pat,
yes.
Thank you for bringing this up, because as we sat through the DNREC presentation earlier,
right,
and when we got to the part that had all the pictures, there's a green roof here. Yeah. And I found it so helpful to take to the Mayor's Advisory Group on Trees this Friday to talk about, are there ways to incentivize the creation of green roofs? Maybe not only you may be coming at it from the commercial standpoint, but we might be coming at it from the residential standpoint. Right. And I was really glad to hear you say, mention the CDP, the planning commissioners. How do you see this idea melding with the CDP? Because what helps me get behind everything is that, to me, our ordinances should follow the CDP.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
So how do we integrate
I
all of that?
I missed the meeting that we had with the Planning Commission, unfortunately, and I'd like to make sure we talk with them to see that this is perhaps on their radar. I hope it is, because again, it's planning for the city, and I think we all should have some input about where that's going, as opposed to after we receive a CDP draft and find some things are not in there that we wish they were. So I would like to see us meet with them again.
And I'm also curious, since you mentioned you talked to some developers and so forth, just on background.
Yes.
Did they happen to mention the height?
No, well, I wasn't looking to change the 42 feet, and neither were they. It can be done within the 42 feet. There's no issue with that. But interesting that you talk about the residences, because the idea of a green roof in residential, that's another thing we ought to talk about at some point, too, is not necessarily mixed use, but how the zoning in our residentials currently, how it works. We have R1, we have R2, but you realize that our residential community requires a certain roof pitch.
I do.
Yeah. So that becomes tricky.
Well, however, I was thinking, trying to connect all the dots, that when the surveys happen to include residents, and if we on committees start talking about the potential of, well, do we want to start surfacing ideas such as incentivizing a green roof, then you start getting some kind of groundswell to get folks to even have a concept for a green roof.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If you think about it on that same thing right now, if you have a 50 by 100 lot, you could build a 10,000 square building and make it commercial. But that whole lot would be impervious to rain, runoff, whatever would just be going out to the street. Whereas in that same lot, if you gave them some incentives, maybe they could put on top of that 10,000 square foot a garden that all of a sudden makes the whole or most of that 5,000 square feet.
Well, and even if it made some of it pervious, that gets you ahead of the game with every development.
Yeah, I think so too. And if I think I recall, I think somewhere in the CDP has been over the years discussion of mixed use.
Yes, there's some.
And discussion of the downtown development, whatever, but mixed use has been in there. Just from a historical perspective, if you think about this, most downtowns in America were started by businesses downstairs and the people living upstairs. And if you look back in Rehoboth 50, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, most of Rehoboth Avenue were residences. A lot of them were residences with upstairs and commercial downstairs, and some of that's changed, and you can see that, but you can see that in certain places that have been kept. I look back at when I was working down here 35, 40 years ago, most of the people in the summertime that worked in town, I'd say close to 50%, lived within town or just outside because their families had places, but more importantly, because it was cheap to rent. You could rent, 5 guys could rent a house for the summer, and they'd pay about $1,000 each. And now that's way outside. And many of the businesses downtown now, their employees are driving from Greenville, Greenwood, Bridgeville, Millsboro, and as Pat said, even the upper level management can't afford to live in town, so they're living someplace outside. And I think what this does, this could give us an opportunity to do certain things with our downtown that bring people to live there. And more, I don't necessarily think it's going to bring any families, but it's going to bring situations where people can maybe afford to have a place to stay. I mean, right now, if you look at the commercial district in Rehoboth, the property values are pretty depressed. And things like the Christmas shop, I think the Christmas shop, their assessment a few years ago may have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.8, 1.9 million. I think they originally put it for sale for about $2 million. Right now it's being offered, I think, for 1.2 or 1.3, and it's going nowhere. And I think a lot of that has to do with investors saying, well, I could buy this property, but what am I going to do with it? I'm restricted. Oh, I'd love to put a restaurant downstairs and 4 little 1-bedroom apartments upstairs. I can't do that. Nobody's going to really, most people don't want to put a retail shop or a restaurant on the second floor because who's going to walk up the stairs? And so I think there are certain things that we can incentivize some people to maybe think about investments downtown. There are some empty lots over on Wilmington where La La Land used to be. It's a parking lot. Mm-hmm. Well, I remember when the fellow tore it down, his idea was to build something on there to have retail downstairs and maybe condos or something upstairs. But our limitations are there with the zoning code.
So, Mayor, maybe you can just educate me on one issue. Let's use the Christmas shop as the example. And if it were torn down, as Pat mentioned, and rebuilt with apartments upstairs, why wouldn't those apartments be rented for an extraordinary amount of money because they're right on top of the ocean?
Because they're right on top of a business. And I would think, from my perspective, it's right on top of a business. Who knows what kind of business is going to be downstairs? Does anybody live above the Bottle and Cork? Yes, they used to. But, and so who's going to live up there? It's not going to be you and I. It's going to be our children or our grandchildren that are coming down to the beach to work for the summer. And so if you think about it from an investment perspective, somebody is building a 5,000 square foot restaurant. They want to come in, but how do you incentivize them to spend that amount of money? Maybe you build 2 floors of 4 1-bedroom apartments on each and rent those out for the summer at $3,000 a piece. You got 8 of those, that's $25,000 in addition to what you got downstairs.
But I think really and truly that my thinking about this is, and just my thinking, that those would have to have year-long leases, and there would have to be some sort of, only if it's a 1-bedroom apartment, the lease would say no more than 2 people or more than 3 people. Yeah. We're looking, I think, at the mid-management people that are working year-round downtown. This could be just really wonderful for them. I mean, and potentially, and one of the things that's been interesting in talking with the commercial real estate agents is they're like, oh my God, we're having trouble renting places that, for example, clothing stores, items that you can buy on Amazon. Yes. Because that's what people are doing. And it's happening all over the country. It's not just here. Right. She said service businesses or, things that are experience-based are the kinds of things that are being successful, and restaurants, of course, in these areas, in these downtown areas.
So I did. Oh, I'm sorry, Tony. Please finish. You go ahead. Oh, I just wanted to say two things. One, I really kind of like this process where you brought an idea, just where we could discuss and see where we go forward with it. So thank you for doing that and being strategic in your thinking and getting us to think strategically for the future of the city. Sure. So number one. Number two, I'm very much in support of continuing to pursue this and looking at the details in the right forum. So I think it's very intriguing, and I think it dovetails nicely with the last presentation we got relative to the survey results, from Main Street, and the concern about employees and concern about folks coming in and renting the vacant buildings. So thank you for doing this, and I'm totally in support of continuing to analyze the opportunity for mixed use. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I also support having a conversation with the Planning Commission or handing it over to them at some point. I can remember sitting in on meetings on this topic about 10 plus years ago when the original CDP was made, and there were conversations, and it was fading recollection, but there was conversations about the type of tenant here. Do you want weekly tenants that come and go? Do you want the year-round tenants? Do you want them as visitors, workforce, or full-time residents? So I think there's a lot on the plate to talk about. And also, I think I need to go back, or we need to go back and look at the zoning law, because I believe it's not just setbacks and parking. I think there's other restrictions.
There probably are.
And height restriction, and maybe even natural, I don't remember, but all of them need to be looked at in a package.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, good idea. Well, and you may or may not remember, Stan, that in 2009 I brought this forward and it got nowhere.
There you go.
Well, what a difference a decade might make.
Hey, Commissioner Clusi, this is a great restart, and thank you for this. And I think we're already seeing a lot of energy behind it. So, thanks for getting this back in the forefront, so we can continue to have this conversation, and hopefully have it in a fairly rapid pace.
Good.
So what would be, since there does seem to be energy around the conversations, what would be the actual real next step to get it as a high priority item, or at least to have the Planning Commission informed of where we sit?
I think it would be useful to have a joint workshop with them, just to talk about this subject. Doesn't have to be a long one, but I mean, just to kind of have an idea, and we'll have a bunch of opinions and ideas and thoughts, and then they can start to distill it and come back to us, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the points you made, which is excellent, is that you've already reached out to commercial developers and residential developers and real estate agents who deal with both commercial and residential properties, and to get that valued insight into, a better informed path forward.
Well, and I've asked two of them to do a pro forma for me on a 5,000 square foot lot, so they can give us, something to look at, to see what makes sense, that we can then share with the Planning Commission and get their ideas and thoughts. And yeah.
Could we ask Debbie how to integrate this in with the CDP conversations?
I'm happy I came to observe today. One of the things I just do want to give some background on is the governor's initiatives with the Downtown Development District. The mixed use is one of the initiatives in the governor's Downtown Development District. So we've written several ordinances. You have Seaford, you have Harrington, you have Laurel, Georgetown, where they're doing overlay districts, new districts, just specific to that area. So this is great because you might get the benefit of a lot of municipalities that have the Downtown Development District. They've done the research. They already have some construction underway. So it's a great lessons learned opportunity. So I applaud you for bringing this forward. This is a big passion of mine. And there are some negative, there's some things you have to work out. Parking, when you're doing 100% of the building lot, there's some situations you can come in and you're paying in lieu of parking. or maybe you're paying towards a parking area where people can have tags and they're paying for that infrastructure. There's a lot of different solutions for this. So as far as the CDP, I think we need to have the discussion probably sooner than later. We also, I think, during the survey process, talk about it to see if this is something the community would want to do in certain areas. And then the initiative in the CDP is to move forward to look at the research and the results of, do you need new zoning district? Do you need an overlay zoning district? How can this be applied? And get the input from the builders as well, because if it's not going to work in their budget plan, then you're writing an ordinance that people are not going to come and use. So Milford's doing it as well. So there's a lot of, I think, a lot of downtown development districts that you'll get the benefit from that information. That helps.
That's great.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yep. Great, Debbie. Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, Pat.
Sure. Okay. I was thinking about sitting down, but I'm thinking I might as well just stand up here at this point. Next item on the agenda, I think.
Sure. We're going to move right on to C, which is discussion on expressed activity.
Okay. So I've met with the chief and Sergeant Riddle on the special event ordinance, and I understand where they're coming from. I mean, it's for them, it's all about safety, but primary for me is we have to guarantee First Amendment rights of the assembly and free speech. I mean, it's what our democracy is built on. It's very important. I then put this together, and I know I've talked a little bit with the city solicitor, and he's looking to then work with the police force and try to come up with something that makes sense with the current special event ordinance. The purpose of this one, I was looking at it as a two-step. I did not want to go into their ordinance and start making changes personally. I'm not an attorney. I'm looking to try to do this as a place to start. And to me, it felt like a two-step process. I don't know what you think about that idea, but for me, it was the definition being a public gathering of individuals not reasonably expected to have a significant impact upon the ordinary use of public streets, rights-of-way, sidewalks, boardwalk, beach, or other public areas where the primary purpose is to exercise of the rights of assembly and free speech as guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. That's my definition. I think it's a reasonable definition of what we're looking at. I came up with a processing fee. I came up also with a applicant, and I think it was on the back page of, I don't know if you got, I had a very simple application that was basically the date of the application, the name of the person, their address, a contact phone number, date and time of gathering, estimated length of gathering, and the location. So that's unlike what was required from the special event ordinance. So I guess the important piece of this was the permit itself. And it says a permit will be issued for the public gathering if approved by the city manager as an expressive activity, which is that definition above. And once she reviews the application, that she has to decide within 3 days of allowing that expressive activity. So it's put into the city manager to make that decision. If the city manager makes a decision that, well, it's going to be 500 people and it's going to require closure of streets, it's really, I think, what was meant by this particular ordinance was things like Sea Witch and so forth. And there's other things, but when we're talking about 10 people, 20 people, maybe 40 people exercising their rights to free speech, I think that the city manager will be able to make that decision of whether it's a special event or simply expressive activity. One thing that's not in here, and I did not put it in here because I wasn't sure how I could do that, because I'm not the attorney to write the law, was an appeal. What if she says, oh no, you're going to have to spend the $600 for this, and then someone should have a right to appeal that if that's not the case. So this is meant for conversation and for the review of the commissioners and for probably the city solicitor to take a look at, perhaps even, and give us some idea if are we headed in the right direction with this. But my thoughts, and I believe, I don't want to speak for the rest of the commissioners, but I think we all think it's important to guarantee rights of assembly and free speech.
I have two comments right off the bat. First of all, I can think of no more important agenda item than this, quite frankly. We have to retain the right of free assembly in this city, and anything that's perceived to negate that right needs to be addressed immediately. I had the chance to review this and discuss it as well. So I think this is a great start. When I say start, I don't mean that we should spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about this. I think we need to address this as soon as possible. The only two things that I would even content-wise weigh in on here are one, I agree with one of the speakers at the beginning who indicated that we should potentially have the opportunity to waive or have something in this that allows a waiver for perhaps nonprofit or 5013C, I think it is, or 503. I'm sorry, I always forget. It's 5013C. So nonprofits, for who are expressively undertaking this type of activity. Number one. Number two, I think that there should be some sort of appeal. We're fortunate to have good city managers who, obviously would interpret this, the way it should be interpreted, but just in the off chance that there is a disagreement, the appeal should happen. It should happen quickly to the Board of Commissioners. So those are the two things content-wise, but I think generally this is right on target. And I think the sooner we can put something like this in place, whether it's a standalone ordinance or incorporated into the special events ordinance, I defer to Chief, who, it's the ordinance he drafted and legal, but I think this should be put up for a vote ASAP. And I like what you have with my two comments, so we can't wait on this.
Thank you. No, I agree.
Pat, one thing in your application, it does not mention anything about the number of people. I would imagine that's something important to the city manager or even to an application, because if someone says it's 3 or 4 or 20 people, I think that's
I would agree. That should be in there. I mean, an estimate. No one's going to know exactly, but an estimate would be in order.
And when I, listening to everybody today and everything I've heard since we first put this event ordinance out is three things. One is the timing, 8 weeks versus something else. One is the cost, $600 versus what you've had, which is a $50 non-refundable, which I think is fair. And I think talking with Lieutenant Riddle and Chief Banks, they were along those lines. Their $600 was more of a couple policemen, the bandstand, and the $50. And they said non-refundable, I know, initially. And, if you look at if somebody's not going to use the bandstand or they're going to have 15 or 20 people walking on the boardwalk or going up on the beach and having placards and saying no drilling or something like that, I think that's probably something they were working towards anyway. And then the third was the city manager, whether she has the right to deny, or is it Lieutenant Riddle, or is it Chris Johnson? And I agree with that part. So, I mean, I think the cost side is kind of already being addressed to an extent. It's really the timing. And is it, who's going to make the decision of, this being a separate versus 3 days versus a longer period of time. 8 weeks is a long period of time, don't get me wrong. And I've been reading some stuff that the the solicitor put out about various different places. Some Supreme Court things said something like 20 days is kind of the edge. But I think every municipality is a little bit different. It's the 3 days, I think, is pretty tight for, you know, something that could conceivably bring a lot of people. I mean, it could be on the application 6 to 10 or 20, but it could be something that could be a lot, and so there may be more stuff. So those are my comments. I think this is good that we're talking about this. I think, you know, the city staff has gone a long way to put together this special events ordinance, and I think it's, yes, we did vote it in, and but I think if there's some kind of an amendment or an addition like this as a separate piece, that may be something that could be worked out. But I think it's probably...
Yeah, it's interesting, I mean, in terms of who makes the decision to deny. I, and City Solicitor, perhaps you can help me with this, but it seems to me you would not want the police necessarily making that decision. It would be the city manager would make that decision, because there's probably case law out there where I've been told by someone who specializes in these kinds of things that you wouldn't necessarily want the police to have the decision on this. Now, I understand once she makes a decision, perhaps, that it's a special event, then they're making all kinds of decisions about what's needed in that situation. Can you?
I can comment some. I know the chief was raising his hand. Is there something you wanted to weigh in on, Chief? There are a few things that I wanted to mention.
I just wanted to clarify as far as who is making the decision. A final decision does become to the city manager for her to do it. What we are doing is doing the front-end work to trying to get the information to her so she can make a decision. So at no time is myself or Lieutenant Riddle or Chris Johnson making the decision. It is the city manager in our process, in our ordinance and our process. Just wanted to clarify that.
So a couple of things I wanted to mention about this proposed ordinance as it relates to the special events ordinance that was passed. Initially, I certainly appreciate all the input that the public has given on where the cases are on this, and have done a fair amount of research over the last week and a half. But we're hearing a lot from people who are defending the First Amendment, which we should hear from. I think, unfortunately, we're not hearing from people who want to commend the police department for putting together this ordinance that, you know, in a city that's changing rapidly, growing, we're having much larger events, there is a need to balance law enforcement with the right of peaceful assembly. So I think that they're trying to do that, and, you know, so we're working toward that goal. I think that what Commissioner Calusi has introduced has also put a highlight on some changes we could make to this ordinance. I would like the opportunity to work with her and with the police department to try and find a way to blend them together. Rather than being two separate ordinances, I think we can make them work in some ways together. So with that sort of good faith intention, I've spoken with Lieutenant Riddle and the chief, and they are not going to implement this. They're not going to enforce the $600 fee. It's going to be a $50 processing fee over the next month or while we try to put together an ordinance that we can bring you that incorporates much of what Commissioner Calusi has done. They're not going to originally enforce the 8-week requirement. They're going to look at each application and determine whether it's been submitted timely enough that they can get the adequate law enforcement measures in place. If not, they're going to recommend to the city manager that the permit be denied. It wasn't because it's not timely. Thankfully, this isn't an extremely busy time of the season, so there's not tons of events going on right now. So this is an opportunity, I think, to work through this ordinance and try and find where that happy medium is. But that's the way I would like to proceed based upon the conversations I've had with the commissioner and with the police department, if that's agreeable.
I could absolutely support that, because to me, it was certainly not my intent when we passed the ordinance to limit freedom of speech.
Right.
That was not even on the discussion points. It was I thought, to balance what our police officers needed at the same time, not trying to limit anything else. So I'm very much supportive of your course of action, and then coming back to us with potential changes.
Yeah, as I am, you know, I think the intent is good. Whether this is the right methodology, I'm comfortable with Glenn working with
I
you.
wasn't suggesting that we pass this.
Right,
it was just a starting point, and I knew something had to be done, and I wanted to do it, and I wanted to bring it forward, and that's what I did.
I think it's good. I think certainly we have to keep in the back of our minds the letter from the ACLU, and you know, in terms of freedom of speech, I think we have to provide the opportunity for spontaneity in some of this stuff. So I'm not even sure I want to charge a fee for this type of thing. But anyhow, I'm looking forward to see what y'all come up with.
Pat, let me also say thank you for triggering this. And I guess even more importantly, you know, when we go back to September, my very first meeting, I voted on this. And I think it's good for us to be able to say that we're not perfect up here. And thank you to the ACLU, to the League of Women Voters, and particularly our neighbors, for challenging us and helping us think this through so that we can move toward, you know, what I often say, I'll quote, a more perfect union. That is our work. And it's never going to be perfect, but we can move in that direction with your challenges, your good ideas, your support, and everything. So, you know, I'm in agreement, I think, Solicitor, that we ought to try to move toward one ordinance that's comprehensive, that can take advantage of what we really want here. It's going to be critical from my point of view that there's an appeal process. I think that has to happen. I think we should think seriously about, you know, is there a way that if there is a fee, and I would say that maybe it's not even necessary to have a fee for this kind of activity, but if there were, that we take a look at the 501c3s and grant them a waiver. And I think it's going to be really critical that we, you know, get very clear among ourselves and be able to communicate how we differentiate expressive activity from special events. You know, special events, the Sea-Witch Parade, so, and things like that, you know, fit into this big category that takes a massive amount of city support and work and serious thought about public safety and so on, you know, as opposed to something that I think falls into this definition. I think it's also important that we think about what if, I mean, this afternoon suddenly 50 people decide to walk down the boardwalk silently holding a sign, and they didn't fill out something, they didn't talk to us. What is there a consequence to that, or does that just spontaneously happen?
Spontaneously.
Spontaneously, thank you.
Just let it help you.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, and does that just happen? Because, you know, that's what, you know, this country is all about, that we can be spontaneous, assuming it's not doing these things. It's not having a significant impact on our streets and our boardwalk, and particularly on public safety, which is so important.
All right, so Glenn will work with the city manager and the police in putting something together that we can look at as we move forward, whether it's combining the two separate, maybe having one as an extension of the other. And then we'll put something together to publicly discuss that at a meeting in the future, and we'll make sure that we post it for people to see.
Can we have a time frame set for March 15th, or for the next meeting, to have at least a draft ready for discussion and potentially even a vote? I don't know if that's possible, Glenn. I'll defer to you.
I would doubt that we could have a vote on it, because I think we should discuss it. You know, and then, you know, have a vote the next voting meeting, something like that. It just depends on the timing for the solicitor.
But you've suspended, or it's been suspended, the $50 or the $600 requirement, and the 8-week requirement has been suspended at this time.
Yes, what I understand being enforced, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, to the point there, while Chief's coming up, how do we do that when the ordinance is in place? It's law. Can we just suspend a component, or?
It's on the books.
Or do we need to vote?
You could pass an official moratorium. We don't have that on the agenda. So
Okay.
this is sort of in the realm of selective enforcement, where police officers all the time see somebody speeding and they choose to or not to arrest them. So in this instance, they've made a representation that they're not going to be enforcing those components of the ordinance.
Mayor, can we let Ms. Cabry speak?
Chief Banks, go ahead.
No, exactly. We agree with Mr. Mayor Ellis. Again, want to be careful when we're saying we're going to waive everything. For example, if somebody has an extra duty event and they're asking for a police response, or police are going to need to shut streets down. If it's house moving, if it's whatever, we are still they're hiring police officers extra duty, so that's still going to be paid for. And again, that comes around the $600 and all that, because when they're putting the permit in, and it's $50 on the books already, and I'm hiring a police officer for a 3-hour minimum, that's where we get the $600 to begin with, up, except minus the bandstand. So I just want to clarify that. Yes, we agree with that and start waiving that until this gets situated. But I don't want anybody to think for sure that we won't ever charge somebody the money for the extra duty police officers. That's happening now.
And I'd like to interject and speak not only to the commissioners in the audience here, but an interesting point Commissioner Byrne just brought up. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Chief, but if you can stand up again, please. So it's helpful to me, at least, and to be reminded of why this was put in place from the first onset of this, and that was for safety. So this was brought forward for safety reasons. The city of Rehoboth Beach is a popular, very demanding spot for those who want to I'll say protest or assemble peacefully. This is the place to do it. We have a lot of people here, we have the beach here, and we have a lot of races here. That's why people come here, as was pointed out from the beginning by the Chief and Lieutenant Riddle. So I asked the question, and again, not to dissuade anyone or any group from being able to assemble peacefully and being able to say what they have to say. So I asked the chief at the onset of this ordinance, so what would happen if, as Commissioner Byrne points out, 50 people all of a sudden react to whatever it might be, okay? The President of the United States gets up, makes a federal proclamation, no more red vehicles in the United States of America. Somebody tomorrow says, okay, we're going to peacefully assemble, we're going to hold up signs, and we're going to march down the boardwalk. And 2 people, 25 people, 50 people start coming in and announcing their discouragement that this happened the night before. So what would you do? Would you have to do anything, Chief? The police?
Well, if they didn't get a permit and we didn't know anything about it, and they went up there and started out 50 and then they included going to 100, we'd be calling in officers to sit there and do it, especially if you had any anti-protest, somebody likes blue cars versus the red. So again, it's just knowledge. It comes back to safety and knowing what's going on, and to not impede or violate anybody else's right that's using the boardwalk and all that. It's always that balancing act, and and make sure there's a free flow. Are they blocking any intersections? So we have to have additional manpower down there to make sure that both sides are equally represented, as far as make sure everybody's rights, constitutional rights, are, nobody's violating any of those. So it does come a safety issue. That's why we wanted this up front, to go ahead and get a permit in, so we could decide if it's an event or it's just something, just somebody expressing their beliefs, their rights. And again, I don't think so far that anybody can come back and say that we're not doing that because we're very conscientious about the First Amendment and want to make sure that we're doing everything right. But it does come a safety issue if we don't know about it up front and about calling people in, and then we may not have the resources available. We are a limited manpower police department, so we rely a lot on outside agencies, not just in Sussex County, but throughout the state to get them down here. And a lot of times just because we call, people are responsive, but you have to put things together and get their manpower. So every event is different. That's why we need to sit there and look at it, and we looked at the time frame, and that's why it came down to under the safety. But again, we're not trying to stop anybody's rights. No, it is that delicate balancing act, but there's a lot of things that goes into it because unfortunately the times have changed. The world has changed, and there's a lot of events and things that take on almost weekly during the summer months when we had the foot races. That has nothing to do with the freedom of speech, but that's another event. And we get complaints about the traffic being shut down. Why can't I go here? Why is this delay? On the other side of that, there's another side. I love them. It helps with businesses, helps with hotels. So it is that delicate balancing act, and that's why this whole ordinance came about that we put together, started with the police department and worked it through the city. And also, again, it wasn't to infringe on anybody's rights, it's to try to work together and have that delicate balancing act, and we will continue to do that. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yes, it's safety, 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 and every example is a little bit different.
And you've been a police officer here 25 years?
26.
Okay. And have you, in your 26 years, seen folks assemble peacefully in the past, like spontaneously?
Absolutely, and 2 or 3 or whatever, we've allowed that to go. We'll get phone calls about why are they allowed to do this, and we tell them they're exercising their rights, First Amendment, if it's religion or whatever the case may be. So again, we're mindful of that and try to work with any group.
So whether it's protesting the color red or against oil drilling or whatever the case might be, it's taken on a case-by-case measure, right?
Correct.
Okay. So again, it's just important that you know the safety issue and the folks that come here, we're trying to, excuse me, we're trying to strike a balance. So never to dissuade anyone from coming and protesting or even talking about something favorably. That's not what we're trying to do here. But very important that you hear from the safety perspective from the police department as to what the difference is. That's all I'm trying to point out.
Thank you.
There was a gentleman that had his hand up. Anybody?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
the lady.
May I say? Sure, please.
And just a few observations. The ordinance that Commissioner Clusi, and this is a first draft, but looking at it right away, a couple points. Line 14, a public gathering by individuals not reasonably expected to have a significant impact. Right away, I'm going to tell you that who determines what is significant? I've heard the number 2 or 3 people, 20 people, 200 people. It doesn't matter how many people come. If there are 2 people, they have a right to assemble. If it's 200 people, they have a right to assemble. Do you want to?
But you're not reading the rest of the line. Ordinary use of public streets, so on and so forth. So if it's 2 people stopping cars, that's an issue.
Yes.
And there's
well,
200
that's not
people
legal.
stopping cars.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And that's the point of that. And so I think if you look at that first sentence, reasonably expected to have a significant impact, we're not talking about a significant impact on what you're trying to do is convey your expressive ideas. It's a reasonable impact on
Yeah, I think we agree. If we could talk about it, I agree. I think we're agreeing. But I keep hearing numbers. If 2,000 people choose to line the beach from, north to south, and you have 2,000 people, that number shouldn't have an impact on the decision you make whether or not to appeal I mean, to give a permit. You know, if 20,000, well, we'd never get that many. But I keep hearing numbers like, well, if it's just 2 or 4, or if it's 20 or 40, you can't, I'm not teaching you, but you
I think the city solicitor, you're going to have to address that. I'm
yeah,
sure there's case law there.
And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would just, when you are discussing it, know that those of us sitting here, that's a red flag when we see words like reasonable and significant. And I think lawyers would probably, think the same way. And the other one, I do want to spend, I see where this is attempting to be a 2-step process, but then line 29 to 31, the city manager may deny an expressive activity permit for the following reason. The expressive activity is deemed to be a special event. That doesn't, I can't figure out what that means there, because Chapter 230 specifically says rallies and demonstrations. I mean, it's in there. So the moment you're saying, well, it's a rally or a demonstration, then you're throwing it back into Chapter 230.
Well, that's not what I meant there.
I know it isn't, but I just want to, because I think it's easy if you hear these things now, we won't have to write letters. And when you're discussing it, keep in mind, there seems to be some kind of problem there. And the final thing I point out, and I appreciate that you're not going to charge the $600 and you're going to waive the 8-week. But again, it goes back to the rule of law. Who has the authority to say, all right, we're going to take a second look at this. So for the time being, we're not going to enforce the 8-week advance notice permit. The police chief is saying he's going to do that, and I appreciate that he's willing, but he doesn't have that authority, and that's the other thing that we are concerned about. You've got to work with the rule of law. What you passed in October is right now the law in this city. So until you decide to have a moratorium, he has no option but to charge $600 and to require 8 weeks. He doesn't have an option to say, we won't charge it for this guy. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you. We're going to move right on to commissioner comments. Just a couple things. We do have a budget meeting at 1 o'clock today. And our next meeting, regular meeting, is on March 15th on Friday. And that's all that I've got. Anybody else?
Quick note, and this is an update and a hold the date announcement for those of you that are not aware. The dedication of the Steve Elkins Way, Commissioner Schlosser and I have been working with Camp Rehoboth and others on this, will be Saturday, May 4th at 1:30 p.m., not in the morning, but rather at 1:30 p.m., followed by a 2 p.m. reception at Camp Rehoboth. And details will be forthcoming.
Thank you. Anybody else? Nothing? If not, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.